It was a normal school day, or at least it started that way. Students filled the hallways, chatting, laughing, and rushing to their next classes. The usual noise echoed through the corridors. But as the clock struck 11 o'clock a.m., an announcement came over the loudspeakers. "Attention students and staff, this is a lockdown. Please proceed to the nearest classroom immediately." Panic began to spread like wildfire. Was it just a drill, or was something more sinister at play? No one knew, but everyone feared the worst. Locked inside their classroom, the students tried to keep quiet. The teacher reassured them that everything would be okay, but her voice was shaky. Then, faint noises started coming from the hallway. It wasn't the sound of footsteps, but something else entirely. A dragging noise, like someone was pulling something heavy across the floor. The sound grew louder, closer. "Shh," the teacher whispered, her eyes wide with fear. The students exchanged terrified glances, trying to decipher the eerie sounds that were now right outside the door. The noise stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Everyone held their breath, hoping the worst was over. Suddenly, the door handle rattled violently. The teacher stood up, gesturing for the students to stay put. She slowly approached the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the lock. "Who's there?" she whispered, but there was no response. Gathering her courage, she opened the door just a crack to peek outside. In an instant, something yanked her through the gap. The door slammed shut, leaving the students alone, staring at the empty spot where their teacher had been. The room plunged into chaos. The students huddled together, some crying, others frozen in shock. They were trapped, locked in with no way to escape and no one to help them. The hallway was eerily silent again, but the fear in the room was palpable. "We have to do something," one of the students finally whispered. "But what?" another replied, his voice trembling. No one had an answer. The only thing they knew for sure was that whatever had taken their teacher was still out there, and it could come back at any moment. As the minutes ticked by, the students realized they couldn't just sit and wait for whatever was outside to return. One of them, a resourceful girl named Emily, suggested they try to barricade the door. They gathered desks, chairs, anything they could find, and piled them against the entrance. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. "We need to stay calm," Emily said, trying to steady her own nerves. "If we stick together, we can get through this." The others nodded, though their faces showed they weren't so sure. Just as they finished securing the door, the strange noises returned, louder and more terrifying than before. It was as if the thing outside was taunting them, letting them know it was still there, still watching. The students backed away from the door, their eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A loud bang echoed through the room as if something heavy had been thrown against the door. The students screamed, huddling together in the corner, hoping the barricade would hold. Amidst the chaos, the school's PA system crackled to life again. "Attention, this is the principal. The situation is under control. Remain calm and stay where you are. Help is on the way." Relief washed over the students, but it was short-lived. As the announcement ended, the banging on the door resumed, more ferocious than ever. It was as if the voice had only angered whatever was out there. "That doesn't sound like help," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. The students exchanged terrified looks, realizing they were far from safe. The noise suddenly stopped, and an eerie silence filled the room. The students waited, holding their breath, expecting the worst. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. The barricade had been pushed aside as if it weighed nothing, but no one was there. The hallway was empty, save for a trail of blood leading down the corridor. The students, too scared to move, remained huddled together. It wasn't until the police arrived hours later that they were found, still trembling in fear. But by then, whatever had haunted the school had vanished, leaving behind only questions and nightmares. It was nearing the end of the school day when the announcement came. "Attention, this is a lockdown. Please proceed to the nearest classroom." The students, caught off guard, quickly shuffled into the nearest rooms. Confusion and worry etched on their faces. Was it a drill? A threat? No one knew, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Mr. Johnson, a history teacher, ushered his class into the room, locking the door behind them. "Stay calm," he said, though his own hands shook as he spoke. "We'll be fine." As the students settled into uneasy silence, something caught the corner of Mr. Johnson's eye, a shadow passing by the classroom window. He glanced up, trying to get a better look, but whatever it was had moved too quickly. "Did anyone else see that?" he asked, but the students just stared back at him, eyes wide with fear. He walked over to the window, peering out into the empty hallway. There was nothing there, just the dimly lit corridor stretching out in both directions. But the feeling that something, or someone, was out there wouldn't leave him. The lockdown dragged on, and the students grew more restless. Mr. Johnson tried to keep them calm, but the fear was becoming overwhelming. Just then, the lights flickered, and the classroom door creaked open slightly. Everyone froze, staring at the door in disbelief. "Stay here," Mr. Johnson whispered, grabbing a nearby ruler as if it could protect him. He approached the door cautiously, pushing it open a bit more to see outside. But as soon as he did, the door slammed shut, trapping him outside. The students screamed, rushing to the door, but when they opened it, Mr. Johnson was gone. The students were in a panic. Their teacher had just vanished, and they were all alone. They tried to call for help, but their phones had no signal, and the school's PA system was silent. "What do we do?" one of the students cried, tears streaming down her face. "We have to stay together," another replied, though he sounded more scared than reassuring. They moved the desks to block the door, hoping it would keep whatever took Mr. Johnson from coming back. But deep down, they knew it was only a matter of time. As they waited in the dark, strange things began to happen. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, making them shiver. Whispers echoed through the room, though no one was speaking. And the shadow that Mr. Johnson had seen earlier seemed to return, darting across the walls but never revealing its true form. The students huddled together, too scared to move, as the shadow danced around them, taunting them. "What is that thing?" someone whispered, but no one had an answer. The only thing they knew for sure was that they weren't alone. Just when they thought things couldn't get worse, they heard footsteps approaching. They held their breath, hoping it was someone coming to save them. The door rattled as if someone was trying to open it, but the desks they had piled against it kept it closed. "Help us!" one of the students shouted, banging on the door. But instead of a response, the footsteps stopped, and the shadow on the wall grew larger, darker. It loomed over them, its presence suffocating, and they realized with horror that their hope was just another cruel trick. The students knew they couldn't stay in the classroom forever. They had to find a way out before whatever was outside decided to come in. Emily, one of the braver students, suggested they make a run for it. "We can't just sit here and wait to be picked off one by one," she said, her voice shaking but determined. The others agreed, though fear gripped their hearts. They moved the desks away from the door, bracing themselves for whatever was on the other side. "On three," Emily whispered, her hand on the door handle. "1, 2, 3. They flung the door open and ran as fast as they could down the hallway. The shadow followed them, growing larger with every step. They reached the exit, pushing the door open, only to find it locked. "No!" Emily screamed, pounding on the door. The shadow closed in, and just as it seemed they were doomed, the lights flickered back on, and the PA system crackled to life. "Attention, the lockdown is over. You may now leave the building." The shadow vanished, and the door unlocked. The students burst outside, gasping for breath, but the terror of that day would never leave them. It started as a routine lockdown drill, or so everyone thought. The students filed into their classrooms, following the usual procedures. Alex, a quiet student who often went unnoticed, was on his way to the bathroom when the announcement came. "Attention, this is a lockdown. Please proceed to the nearest classroom immediately." He rushed back to his class, but when he got there, the door was already locked. "Let me in," he shouted, banging on the door, but no one heard him. He was alone in the hallway, and the school suddenly felt much darker and more menacing. Alex tried to stay calm, but the eerie silence in the hallway was unnerving. He knocked on the door again, hoping someone would hear him, but there was no response. Panic set in as he realized he was truly alone, with no way to contact anyone. The hallways, usually bustling with activity, were now silent and empty, the only sound his own breathing. "What do I do?" he whispered to himself, his heart pounding. The lockdown didn't seem like a drill anymore. It felt real, and something about the silence made his skin crawl. As Alex wandered the empty halls trying to find a way out, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every creak and groan of the building made him jump, his imagination running wild. Then, he saw it. A dark figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was just a shadow, barely visible, but Alex could feel its eyes on him. He froze, fear gripping him. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its presence was enough to send chills down his spine. Is this real? He wondered. But deep down, he knew it was. Alex knew he couldn't just stand there. He had to find somewhere safe, somewhere to hide from whatever was stalking him. He bolted down the hallway, glancing over his shoulder to see if the figure was following. It was gone, but the fear remained. He tried every door he passed, but they were all locked. "Please let me in," he begged, but there was no answer. Finally, he found a janitor's closet that was unlocked. He slipped inside, closing the door behind him, and crouched in the dark, hoping the figure wouldn't find him. Inside the closet, Alex could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The darkness was suffocating, but it felt safer than being out in the open. He tried to calm himself, but the fear was overwhelming. Then he heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from outside the door. It was slow, deliberate, as if whoever was out there knew exactly where he was. "Go away," Alex whispered. But the tapping continued, growing louder. He covered his ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The fear was too much, and he felt like he was going to lose his mind. Just when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, the tapping stopped. Silence filled the closet, and for a moment, Alex thought he was safe. But then, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A face peering through the small crack in the door. It was pale, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. Alex's breath caught in his throat, and he backed away as far as he could, but there was nowhere to go. The door creaked open slowly, and the figure stepped inside. "No, please," Alex begged, tears streaming down his face, but the figure just smiled wider. In a burst of adrenaline, Alex shoved past the figure and bolted out of the closet. He ran down the hallway, not daring to look back, but he could hear the figure's footsteps right behind him. It was chasing him, gaining on him with every step. "Help!" Alex screamed, but his voice echoed uselessly through the empty school. He rounded a corner, slipping on the polished floor, and scrambled to his feet. The exit was in sight, but it felt miles away. The figure was almost upon him, and Alex knew he wouldn't make it in time. With no other options, Alex turned to face the figure, his back against the wall. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted, his voice trembling. The figure stopped, its twisted smile never fading. "Because you're alone," it whispered, its voice cold and empty. Alex closed his eyes, bracing for the worst. But just as the figure reached out for him, the school's lights flickered back on, and the PA system crackled to life. "Attention, the lockdown is over. You may now leave the building." Alex opened his eyes, and the figure was gone. He was alone again. But this time, the school felt safe, at least for now. At